Hey, this is Delbert McClinton, and you are listening to Icon Fetch.
Welcome to Icon Fetch, the web's premier music interview show. Now, here's your host, Tony Peters.
Welcome to the show. Now, author Dr. Marie Trout has had a unique perspective as the wife and manager of legendary blues guitarist Walter Trout. She's watched over the years as this style of music, created originally by poor African Americans, is predominantly enjoyed today by white middle-class baby boomers. When her husband almost died before getting a liver transplant, she turned to the blues community for support and found the interaction both fascinating and uplifting. In a sense, she was living the blues as well. This started her down a path of researching the blues. She surveyed anonymously over 1,000 blues lovers from all over the world, as well as industry professionals, scholars, and working musicians, to find out why people seem to get healing powers from this music that is often inherently sad. She's published her fascinating results in a new book called The Blues: Why It Still Hurts So Good, with the proceeds benefiting the Heart Fund, serving musicians without health insurance. And to talk about it, we welcome to the show Marie Trout. Marie, how are you? Good to talk to you.
It's so nice to be here, Tony. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, a good place to start here is you are the wife of a blues musician. So how long have you and Walter been together? That's a good place to start.
Well, we met back in Denmark, which is my home country, in 1990, and he proposed to me within 40 minutes of us meeting one another.
Wow.
So I told him, of course, he was out of his mind, but you know what? He definitely had his mind set, and I fell head over heels in love with the man. So we've really been together since that night in September of 1990, and a couple of years later, watching his business dealings, I came from a business background, it became clear that he needed some help in that regard, and I became his manager as well.
And so then you kind of have this unique perspective of watching somebody's career from behind the scenes. And, did you start to see some things that were kind of the genesis of this book?
Yes. Well, you know what? I would stand in the wings at the concerts and look out at the audience, or meet them when I went out and stood in the middle of them. And I always felt that something unique happened at blues concerts, or blues festivals for that matter. There was a camaraderie, there was a closeness, there was a lack of guardedness or pretentiousness that we sometimes otherwise see when we look at each other. And I was curious, what is it about this music that seems to bring this out of people? And people would literally walk in looking tired and fatigued and walk out of these concerts looking visibly lighter. Something had happened in the process of this blues concert, blues rock experience, whatever it was. So I was curious, and, I researched literature and tried to find studies, find anything other than just opinions about what this was, or personal first-person accounts. And I couldn't find anything that really sort of was comprehensive that explained to me what is it this music does to us.
Right. Now, was there one particular kind of event that sort of kind of set you down the path of writing this book?
Well, the event was called Needing to Write My PhD Research or Do My PhD Research,
okay.
My PhD dissertation, where I was looking for a topic, and it all of a sudden hit me. One of my advisors said, well, what is it? Typically, this is right on at the tip of our nose, and it's so close to us we can't even see it. And then it dawned on me, wow, that's it. I wanted this curiosity I've had for years. I want to find out what is really going on with blues fans and with us when we listen to this music. I wanted to open the hood of this car I'd been driving for so many years, so to speak, and look in and see what does the engine look like? Where does the oil come from? What is it that is happening in this blues car that we're all driving down the freeway without thinking about what's going on?
Wow, that's a nice analogy there. Looking under the hood like that is true. It's true. So you can you're obviously curious about this. You want to write this paper on it, but then how do you actually get your information? I mean, did you set up a whole bunch of interviews, that kind of thing?
Yes, before Walter was ill, I started, the whole process with the university of going through all the initial very tedious details of setting up the research, formulating the research question, getting all the ethics taken care of, review boards, all this stuff. And, I had then surveys set up that I sent out to the community via third-party websites. I didn't want people to know it was me conducting this research because that could inadvertently color the results more
Absolutely.
blues rock fans
Right.
than something else. So I sent that out via third-party websites anonymously and got 1,000 responses. And that was well underway. Then the second phase was interviews. I'd done some initially informing me of where the survey questions needed to be, particularly with industry professionals. And then, I did further lots of in-depth interviews with randomly selected blues fans. Again, I could have gone out to the people I know had the stories, had the ones that just delivered the most amazing stories about how blues had changed their lives. But again, I was not interested in that. I wanted a snapshot of the blues community in general. What is really going on out there?
Right, right. And you talk about the blues community, but then you were also kind of, you bring in all this other research. You have scholars, you have I know you interviewed the president of Alligator Records, and then you've even had a chance to talk to some legendary bluesmen. I mean, you got Chris Barber, you got John Mayall. That had to be a thrill to talk to them, too.
Yes, of course. John Mayall is a dear, dear friend. Walter considers him his musical father. And so the fact that he was, there to give a quote for the book. And Chris Barber, I had a wonderful, wonderful close interview with where he really talked about sort of the emotional background for what it was what it was about this music that initially hooked him back in the 40s and 50s.
And then you talked about the fact that, you're putting this paper together, you're putting this research together, and then all of a sudden your husband Walter gets sick. And that kind of sent you down a different path, didn't it?
Well, it was, yes, personally it sure did, because now I was lost. Since I worked for Walter, I was looking at best case scenario, a couple of years without income. Worst case scenario, I was looking at obviously losing my husband. Neither scenario was really good. We have 3 kids we were trying to raise. It was devastating on all levels. So I had made enough progress with the research that what came out of blues fans consistently was the story of how the blues community is such a family to them, and on top of that, how they felt they could be themselves, and that in the blues community, there was a really greatly developed BS meter. We don't want any bullshit, okay? So,
Right. Sure, right.
So there was this need for people to be real. If we're going to connect to one another, well, then it needs to be real. And so all my years of sort of being the manager and thinking business thoughts went out the window, and I just said, I'm going to share how I feel. The researcher, all the labels of who I was sort of got sent in the trash can. And I just became Marie. And I started dialoguing with fans about, what does this feel like? What am I going through? And I in that sense, just expressed my blues. And I was so overwhelmed by the support I got from the blues community, how they responded to me, to Walter, to our story, to us sitting there really up shit creek without a paddle.
Right.
We were so lost and so afraid and so worried, and they held us both financially. They supported us, made everything possible that I needed to do in order to save Walter's life, which was leave our Southern California home, leave our kids with a caregiver for 7 months,
Wow.
go to Nebraska, check him into a hospital in Omaha. I mean, I literally carried my man onto the plane and on a wing and a prayer literally got him to Omaha, where they had a much higher likelihood of him qualifying for a transplant, because there's not such a dire demand for the organs there.
Right.
And so, the blues community held us in that really loving embrace. And, of course, that was personally for me a moment where now it wasn't about the research. It was about experiencing this firsthand.
Right. Absolutely. And, I mean, you talk about this community that's kind of, it's a sense of belonging for a lot of people that, maybe don't feel like they belong in other parts. That's kind of what the blues community offers people is, you talk about in your book about how when these people go to concerts, they can kind of let these emotions out that maybe they're not allowed to show in their everyday life.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter if they belong other places. Many blues fans are successful people with jobs and families and all those things. But there's an element of letting go and being authentically oneself when in the blues community. We don't have to dress up. I was just on the blues cruise. I mean, no fancy dress needed. People come into the dining room in shorts and flip-flops.
Right.
There's just that sense of we are what we are,
right.
And the important things is what we experience together, what we share together, when we go see a amazing performer and we look at each other and we're into it. That's what matters. It's not this, I got to wear my Gucci bag.
Right.
That's not there.
Now, you talk about in the research that you've done for this book, you polled all these blues fans, and it kind of came back that there's an overwhelming kind of demographic that supports the blues right now. It's like it's white, middle class, baby boomers, mostly male kind of thing. And it's kind of fascinating, like where, you kind of document it, that it's maybe the shared experience of that generation that's why the blues music appeals to these people.
Right. Again, when you've been told all your life, don't cry, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, don't do this, don't do that. You kind of get like deer in the headlights when it comes to what's really going on. I just got a divorce, or my wife just got diagnosed with a terminal illness, or whatever goes on in our lives. I'm worried about my son, my daughter. People at work are not nice, Whatever it is we are going through, we have these messages from our background that says, hey, just stop complaining. You're doing fine. Just pull yourself up and get going. And on that background, it's very relieving to hear someone express in music, and it doesn't even have to be with words, but express from a different place of authenticity, of something real, emotion that just is flowing out, and as it does in blues music.
It's interesting because you talked about feeling and authenticity. You use that words a lot in your book. But one of the things that's interesting is that blues isn't necessarily about how technically good you are. And you used an example which I found fascinating where Ainsley Dunbar was a member of John Mayall's band, and he got kicked out for probably being too good.
Exactly. I mean, that's again the barrier of being in your head too much or coming from a head space too much. This has to have grace. This has to have in the pocket, blues musicians talk about all the time. This has to be a felt quality. Even the groove is not an analytical construct. That completely negates a groove if you start thinking about, I got to be slightly offbeat here and I got to, no. That's not where the groove comes from. The groove is something that is felt and that is uniting the players in a field that almost becomes its own entity. So it's much larger than the sum of its parts. And oftentimes if we go in our head too much and we get too technical, that component goes out the window.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'll hear certain blues records, and I'm like, okay, that guy's being too flashy. He needs to tone it down a little bit or something,
Right, right. Or, there are certainly also players, particularly today, where blues has gone in other directions as well, with the infusion of all the other influences from jazz, and in the 60s, raga music from India, where soloing and improvisation became such a vital part of particularly later forms of blues rock, where the soloing can be ferocious. I mean, Walter's a great example of really, really like supercharged. It's almost like a hypercharged musical metabolism that gets expressed, but he's still connecting to a very emotional piece of himself. It is not really a technical exercise. It's coming through this place of, I got to express this. So, obviously the spaces, the step back feel, tap into that field is just as crucial. But I think there are other ways of also expressing musical plugged-inness than just in the more laid-back forms of blues.
Right. Now, you talk about the fact, you mentioned the blues fans, predominantly baby boomer, white guys kind of thing. Then you mentioned this in your book as well. Blues came from poor African Americans. Why did that culture pretty much abandon it, where you say about 90% of the audience is white now?
Yeah, I don't have the answer. I have read lots of people who have expressed their understanding of that, and one of the things might be that the blues just became a reminder of a very oppressive past, and it became painful. It was also a reminder of a time where you could not freely speak. So blues was a way of expressing emotionally some of the things that you couldn't express maybe politically or socially even, for fear of repercussions and being literally persecuted for it or killed. So the blues became a reminder of something old and painful. Now, I see lots of young African-American blues performers embracing it again now, which is so exciting to me, and tapping into that, the roots, their background, and certainly many have also held on as performers. But as fans, there's still a big difference in how our blues fan base looks, and that is primarily, you can go to any blues festival out there and you'll see it. It is mainly white baby boomers still, and that's of course one of the things we really need to, or I would like to work to expand on and change.
Right, and you talked about the fact that the British guys and the British invasion, and especially things like John Mayall and Eric Clapton, and down from there, Rolling Stones and various British artists really helped jumpstart, interest in the blues in America. And then I thought it was interesting. You also said that the Blues Brothers had an influence on people, and I guess that would make sense. And also then Stevie Ray Vaughan. I guess that's kind of interesting to sort of, if you're looking at sort of the pillars of blues popularity kind of thing. I guess sometimes we forget about the Blues Brothers movie as being so monumental in that. So.
Well, it increased visibility for sure, and it did it in a way that was intoxicating. And I would almost talk about two waves of white baby boomers. There were the older generation baby boomers who caught wind of this music often in the 60s with the British performers you mentioned, and then started their research of it in a sense and discovered, wow, it comes from here, and the originators are so powerful, and wow, we've had this all along. That was one group of blues fans, but maybe the younger groups of blues fans discovered it later with movies like The Blues Brothers and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and in Europe also Gary Moore was one of the ones who went back and did a blues album in the early or late 80s, early 90s, can't really remember. But those performers were mentioned quite frequently as almost a second wave that brought attention back to this music. And then again, fans, whenever they get converted, if you will, they start looking back in time and they discover, wow, it comes from here. It has this meaning. Oh my gosh, I understand my own culture a little better now.
Did you find in your research, if mainly the fans are baby boomers, did they feel a kinship with people that were their age or above, or did you find any kind of age restrictions? Like if there's some hotshot 18-year-old kid that's playing blues, was that as easily accessible to the baby boomers?
There are two ways they mainly expressed how they felt about that. One was, I'm so glad this music lives on. I'm so glad young people are finding this and embracing it and are starting to express it. And then there was the other, which many had both kind of perspectives, and the other one was, he needs to feel a little bit more. He needs to experience
right.
a little bit more.
Yeah.
What has he done that he's singing about that it's a little not quite there yet? But
yeah,
maybe he'll get there.
That's interesting. Yeah, I saw the Allman Brothers when Derek Trucks first took over. And I hate to say it, I didn't mean to be like a crusty old man kind of thing, but I felt the same thing when he first took over. I felt like he's hitting the notes, but he's not really feeling it. And then, I saw him a couple years later, and he was fantastic. So I don't know. Maybe it was just, I don't know.
Well, there definitely seems to be an element of when young people discover the blues, it benefits them immensely to go into an apprenticeship of sorts with the old blues masters. Because from there, they internalize, they learn things just by being around them. It's a worldview. It's a view of self. It's a view of others. It's a way of immersing yourself in music. Again, it's not really about the technique, because you can certainly sit in front of YouTube and learn all the notes, but you are not learning the ropes. You're not learning how to immerse yourself. You're not learning how to play with others. You're not learning how to listen. You're not learning that sort of very loose field that happens when blues is really, really being generated in the moment. That's something you have to apprentice to really internalize.
Interesting. Now, with all this, you said you had 1,000 surveys and that kind of stuff. Was there one thing that you got back that really surprised you in the research that you were like, wow, I didn't expect that? I mean, because you have been beside Walter through all this, and you've seen a lot of this kind of on the ground level, but was there still some things that came back in these surveys that really surprised you?
Yeah, there were several things, but one of the main things was how much people today in the 21st century, whether they're baby boomers, which was, of course, mainly the ones I talked to, but I imagine us also others, how much they lack authentic connection to self, so they could really actually feel what they feel, acknowledge what they feel, to others, so that we feel a kinship, true kinship with one another, and to a meaningful sense of history, and to also this sort of experiential field of letting go and having fun. There are some things in our culture that does that. It's when we go out to have fun and escape, for instance, it's often tied in with drinking or self-destructive behavior, or we spend too much money, or whatever it is. The blues offers another pathway and says, we can do this in another way. That, to me, was so powerful. Again, the authentic connection. We seek that maybe online. We seek it in social networks. We seek it wherever we go. But it's often, on Facebook, we can edit our profile to appear however we want, But in the blues and in the blues community, there's this other offering that says, I want to know you. I want to talk with you. And it might start about, a conversation might start about guitar and guitar strings and where you've gone and where you've cruised and whatever. But there's another element of actually connecting authentically to people. I wouldn't say it took me by surprise, but it was an amazing gift to discover how powerful blues still is at offering some of these almost countercultural things to us in a way that is not self-destructive, but that many actually, on the contrary, stated was profoundly healing to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned healing over and over in the book, and I found it interesting that, people go to these blues shows or blues festivals or blues crews, and, largely you think of blues as sad music, and yet you said you were seeing people that were sad coming into the show, and they're leaving with a smile on their face. And it's like, in hearing somebody else's sorrow, we find joy in it. I mean, is that kind of what you're finding, or?
Well, certainly that is cathartic, but I think there's also just that sense of connecting with others about something real, about something that is not synthetic, that's not plastic, that is not there, that's not put together by a producer and a record company to make money. It is put together from the heart of an artist and is broadcast that way, from the heart of the artist to the heart of the audience. There's something profoundly restorative in that I think we really need today. There's a sense of, again, that something is real here. And so I dug into this healing aspect. Well, what does that mean? We've all heard blues is the healing force and blues is the healer. We all sort of know the term, but what does that really mean today? So that's really what I dug into in the book.
Absolutely. And, you kind of finish up the book talking about what is the future of the blues, because in your research, most of these people are baby boomers. So, you kind of just raise questions that really have no answers at this point. But, will the blues continue? And maybe I'll pose that to you. Do you see the blues dying off as a genre, or is this something that we're going to hand to another generation?
I see lots of young people becoming blues performers. I don't really see the fan base changing as accordingly. So a lot of times I see the young performers will be playing to older audiences again. I think there's something, what the research told me was there's something profoundly powerful in the way the blues can tell our story. There's something that is restorative in that, and that, we might be able to express ourselves in a way that we can't on Snapchat or Facebook or Instagram, because young people are also looking to express themselves. But in this music, if we actually sit down and learn the ropes and become a blues musician, or we don't and we just listen to the music and we understand what to listen for, there is a way that we can also find ourselves in that music. And I think that is ultimately one of the places that young people will connect to the music. But, going to a blues concert, if they're all around people who are their parents or even their grandparents' ages, is probably not going to be all that appealing. So we need to also find forums where this music can exist for young people, by young people, and sort of removed from the stigma of grandpa,
right. Yeah.
So there are lots of questions here, but I liked what the research was showing, offering some potential new answers for what is it that connects people to blues in general. That doesn't matter if you're old or young or baby boomer or in the middle. There are some things that blues does that connects us to it, and I think that is universal.
Indeed. I mean, the kids that are on Snapchat or Instagram or whatever that, those kids are still going through problems, whether it's pressures of, trying to get good grades or just getting dumped or whatever it is. Those feelings are universal. You don't have to be 65, 70 years old to enjoy that kind of thing. So.
No, I mean, I was even thinking, the concept of, even in teaching history, the concept of sharecropping. Well, here we have these young people going into student debt. And maybe if they want to buy a house, they're looking at a very similar situation,
right.
being tied down. So there are ways that we can tell stories with the blues where we don't just say, oh, this is a history lesson, you got to learn about your past, but where this is relevant to you. Here's a way these people were expressing how this felt. Do you recognize that? So that there's a personal connection made to something, a topic that young people relate to today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you have a website, it's pretty easy to remember, marietrout.com, right?
Yes.
And that's, I noticed you've got some blogs up there. You've got, and you can order the book there, right?
You can. You can also go on Amazon.com and do that. And it's certainly, the website has reviews. It has different things. It has even a sample chapter from the book. So that's a good resource if you want to find out a little bit more.
Okay, great. Well, Marie, it's been great talking to you. Marie Trout's new book is called The Blues, Why It Still Hurts So Good. And we wish you good luck on it, all right?
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Icon Fetch with Tony Peters. Want more great interviews? Head on over to iconfetch.com. There you'll find every interview we've ever done, plus CD reviews, This Day in Music, and a random album of the day. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Who's Tony going to interview next? It could be you. Send us what you've got to Tony Peters, Icon Fetch, P.O. Box 292134, Dayton, Ohio. Zip code 45429, or email Tony, host@iconfetch.com. Until next time, this is Joe Kelly. Have a great day.